So hello, everyone. Welcome to our session, Silver's Strategies, Capitalizing on the Longevity Economy. Very glad to be here today. And before anything else, I just want to introduce our panelists, our august panel here. Starting all the way to my right is Dr. Joe Coughlin, who's the founder and director of the MIT Age Lab. That was a groundbreaking entity, and we'll talk a little about what Joe's been up to. To my immediate left is Gretchen Addy, who's a senior executive for the design firm IDEO. Actually, I never know exactly how to pronounce it and where the emphasis should be.
IDEO.
IDEO. Okay, got it right. And Gretchen heads up their initiative on aging. Immediately to my left is Paul Irving. You can read these things. Paul is affiliated with too many things to read, but let it be said, he is the founder and director of the new entity at Milken Institute, the Center on the Future of Aging. And to his left is my friend Lisa Sunin, who is the founder and managing partner of Venture Valkyrie. And we'll get into a little bit of what Lisa is doing. So what we have on this panel is really an interesting array of folks who have different perspectives on the same issue. And that is the opportunity in the private sector with regard to this thing called the longevity economy. So what is this thing? A couple of years ago, literally, that would be 2 years ago, we came up with this concept of the longevity economy because we kept hearing arguments in Washington and in the state houses that when you took away all of the fluff, nobody wanted to say it, but the essence of the argument was, we can't afford all these old people. And you would ask for evidence of this because that's an economic claim. We would ask for evidence and people would point to Medicare and Social Security and the challenges of the trust fund. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off and it was like, well, you're making an economic claim, but your evidence is not economics. Your evidence is a program design issue. And so we decided to ask the question, well, if you were to envision a standalone national macroeconomy that was in the US, that was solely driven by the consumer spending of households led by people over 50, what would the GDP of that country be? What would the GDP of that macroeconomy be? And we hired Oxford Economics to look at the numbers, and they punched them, and can I have, here's the number, $7.1 trillion, making it the 3rd largest economy in the world. And slide 16, making it the 3rd largest economy in the world, and after the US and China, and over $2 trillion larger than Japan. Next slide after that, 17. And so what's significant about this macroeconomy? Well, like any other, it generates jobs. It generates income. It generates salaries and wages. And it also busts some myths because it's an economy of people who actually start companies, are entrepreneurs at twice the rate of people in their 20s. So that's the starting point for what we're looking at. And these are people over 50, who spend over $5 trillion a year in consumer spending. They control 80% of net worth. So it's not like we can't afford all these old people. People over 50 are driving the economy. They're a 1/3 of the population, but they account for just under half of GDP in the United States. So with that, as just a level set, what we want to explore is where are the opportunities? How are companies taking advantage of this opportunity or not? What's the missed opportunity? And I want to start with Joe, who works with and you should get together with our friend Paul Cusserow when it comes to Red Sox.
It's certainly clear we're not from Hair Club for Men up here, I'll tell you that.
Embrace your age, embrace who you are. This is the no-net hair loss principle right here.
Bald and proud of it.
So Joe, not looking at that opportunity for men our age. What are some of the things you work with Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies who come to the Age Lab with questions, with challenges that you help them work through? What are the motivations that they're seeing? What are they focused on in terms of, behind their motivation to even pick up the phone and call you?
You know, it's interesting. Businesses and governments, all organizations, institutions, are based, generally speaking, on things that they held to be true yesterday, to use the tools that they did very well yesterday over and over and over again. And business is starting to wake up in the United States, more so overseas, but I would argue that in general, business is still trying to get their arms around what we're calling the longevity economy. Because think about it, for decades, we have to drop the baby boomers in at some point. For decades, they had this endless supply of youth and a youth culture and a youth market. And now all of a sudden, we got a few people out there talking that, no, there's this great group of people that have more education than ever before they do, have more money than any previous generation of older adults they do. But the real difference that I've tried to get across to the businesses that have come to us is that the difference is not about the money, it's not about the numbers, that's the easy part. It's really about generation expectation, that the new business innovation opportunity is that our parents aged politely. They went quietly, they sat and they waited for grandchildren to visit, they went on a few cruise ships, maybe walked a daughter down the aisle. But what businesses are having a hard time getting used to today is that the baby boomers, the largest, the loudest, most annoying generation, of which I'm one, and we've socialized our children to be even louder and more annoying, have the belief that there's a pill, a policy, a product, or a silver bullet that's going to allow us not just to live longer, but to live better. And so the challenge that business has right now, I would say they come to us on three levels. One, what the heck is old? I mean, we use convenience, 50, but frankly, I could jack it down to 40. You need 20 times more light to see as well on the road age 40 than you did at age 20. So is it 40? So how do we define it? And it's also, sometimes the user is not necessarily the buyer. What do you develop? What's the products they're going to need? One of the slides that we have, I forgot the number, we'd look at it later, but the venture capital community and the innovation community that's looking around aging, they love healthcare. Apparently everyone over 50 needs a pill reminder. And then the third area is, how do we deliver that value? Is it the call center of the future? Is it online? Is it face-to-face? So businesses, whether they're insurance companies or major auto companies and the like, really are having a hard time getting their arms around what this is. And just very quickly, I don't want to yield my time, we've got the numbers of how many older people there are and how many years we're going to live. Play with me for a second. I'm a visual person. I want you to imagine every inch being a year. Life expectancy in 1900 was 47 years old. That gives you a whole new definition of midlife crisis, doesn't it? There's 50. We're now older, apparently. Here's 65. But look at this. The fastest growing part of the population is 85 plus, and at least Time Magazine and a number of people who actually are doing research think that 100 is going to become in reach. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to understand the longevity economy, I would suggest it is this part of your lifespan. This is no longer how much they're going to cost. This is no longer in terms of just what they want, but to cast a story on what to do with a third to a half of your life.
So Joe's the only person besides my carpenter who walks around with a tape measure.
When you have red socks, you got to make up for something,
Well, you color coordinated with the watch. So Lisa, Joe, brought up the issue of venture capital and healthcare in particular. Mm-hmm. And can we have slide 18? So up on the screen here are the results of a study, a market forecast that we did that looks at 9 different categories of consumer health and wellness.
Yep.
And our forecast is that over the next 5 years, that this represents a $30 billion revenue opportunity for businesses. And these are, categories that are not waiting to be reimbursed by Medicare, not be waiting to be reimbursed by health insurers. These are the kind of things that, just like vitamins, you will pay for out of your pocket and not get reimbursed by. And then slide 19. And as you can see, there has been, to Joe's point, a lot of investment by venture in health and wellness broadly, and roughly 50%, a little more of that, is in products and services of relevance to the 50 plus. Some of them are explicitly for people over 50 and older, but that 50% is that it's equally relevant at a minimum. So, Lisa, when you look at the opportunity for investing, what are the things that do attract you in these areas, and what are the things where you just say, nah, seen it before, move on?
Well, there are 147 pill tracking companies, so that's a nah, no more for me. But I think the opportunity here, and I come mostly from the healthcare side of things, is pretty massive, and 30 billion I think is actually a gross understatement, because already there's 100 billion being spent on anti-aging products in America, and I don't think the 20-year-olds are buying them. The healthcare spend in the United States is largely focused on people who are over 50. People who are over 50 generally have one chronic illness, and many people have 4 or 5. Actually, it's really tragic. I think 11 million people in the U.S. have 5 chronic illnesses or more. And the cost of managing those populations, and by the way, we aren't even talking about the cost of Alzheimer's and the growing cost of caregiving around people who are homebound for one reason or another. So I think the opportunities are massive here, particularly in the healthcare side, but also in the healthy aging side, which is an area I think has been largely ignored by the venture community, but is starting to be thought about more assertively. How do you tune the opportunity to invest in housing or travel or whatever it may be for people who used to be traveling to their home to never leave again and now are traveling to go bungee jumping in Australia, to your point. So, for me, the opportunity from a market size standpoint is phenomenal, and the underserved opportunity in healthcare and other areas is extraordinary. The challenge is people talk about this group as if it's a market, and it's not a market. I mean, there's 100 million people or some number like that of people who are over 50, and they are extremely heterogeneous. And so you have to look at it as any other massive population, like women. You can't look at all women as a market because they're different, same as you can't look at all older people as a market, and you have to really hone down on what the true opportunity is. I think it's fascinating that if you look at Silicon Valley and the picture you probably all have in your mind of what the typical person in Silicon Valley looks like, it's like a 26-year-old guy in a hoodie, driving around a Tesla. And the truth of the matter is that the guys who've amassed huge amounts of money in Silicon Valley, people like Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison, are investing literally billions of dollars in aging and anti-aging focused technologies and products, pharmaceuticals. So clearly there's a belief among the smart, rich people who've made money by becoming rich by investing that this is the opportunity of the future, and I wholeheartedly believe it.
Anything jump to the top in terms of what you've seen that you say that's a winner?
Well, I definitely think that as more and more people become insured through health insurance, and not just because of Medicare, which covers obviously everybody over 65, but that whole group from 50 to 65, they're now entering the health insurance system, and people of all cultures and languages entering the healthcare system. I think figuring out how to serve those people is a really interesting opportunity, and coming up with new products, even for Medicare, to more effectively manage care, manage costs, keep people healthy instead of treating them when they already get sick. Just really sort of reconstituting what healthcare means is a very big opportunity. I also think that caregiving and figuring out how to help people age at home. So the whole connected home concept, whether it's monitoring or services to the home or whatever it may be. I read an article today, and it was from the New York Times about, I think it was Columbia Presbyterian, that when certain categories of patients present in the ER, they ask them would they rather be treated at home or be admitted to the hospital. And for certain categories of different circumstances, they'll treat you at home. Bring your durable medical equipment and send a nurse to the house every day. That's a really interesting phenomenon because people would much rather be at home. It's frankly safer and healthier for them. So I think that's a big opportunity in particular.
It's also cheaper if you believe
shot.
some of the studies that have recently been done. So Gretchen, I know in the work that we've done, we've been our team has been struck by this challenge, this paradox that this market actually is now attracting a great amount of activity. AARP alone, we have a demo day where we put startups in front of prospective investors. We've done this 3 times now. We're doing our 4th just to give a pitch for May 14th. Anybody that's in Miami, mojitos for everybody. So we have a taker. So we've had over 625 companies over 4 events just in the health and wellness space apply to get on our stage. And of our 30 winners so far, to Lisa's point, half of them have raised over $50 million in venture investment and a couple have exited. But we're still struck, despite this activity, that adoption doesn't even come close to the level of activity and the curve of additional activity. And one of the things that wouldn't be a surprise to you that we've honed in on is that one of the problems is design. That, for the most part, it's not particularly good. I know this is a major sore spot for you. So why don't you share with us your take on what you're seeing, and to the extent you're seeing good stuff out there, why?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, for the number of years now that I've actually been interested and focused in this space for IDEO's benefit is we started out looking at the aging space for ourselves just because we realized we didn't understand it very well, and also for our clients. And culturally in IDEO, we tend to skew towards a younger culture. We're a design consultancy, and so I can count on my hands the people who are the same age as I am, and I'm probably one of the oldest right now. So, it's challenging internally to us because we have a lot of young people, and how do I inspire them? How do I get them excited about this work? And really engage with it and make it a multi-generational conversation, which is what I'm really looking for. Aging is a starting point, but ultimately, this impacts everyone. And then I think when I look outwardly with our clients in terms of relationships, I get very excited about the opportunities, but I see a lot of kind of stepping back and a little bit risk adverse, so I'm going to lose my youth market. I mean, every excuse in the book. But I think one of the things that is sort of highest on my list, and this particularly happens with coaching folks in the startup community, is the fact that they come with the best of intentions. They say, I have this personal story, and because of that, I've made the decision to start my business. And it always kind of puts a sigh in me to sort of say, that's great, and I really appreciate that you're interested in this space. But it takes more than a personal story. You really have to understand this marketplace, and to your point, it's a very broad spectrum market, so you really have to kind of find some focus and then really understand what that market needs, desires, and wants. And sort of my catchphrase for this is, everyone comes to us with this idea of, if you can give me slide 24. this idea of I'm asking them to design with, not for, that they really understand who they are designing for, and that it is not this sort of benevolent effort to kind of, age still equals decline in our economy. And I have another slide that will sort of be the counter to that, but, having spent a lot of time in the field as a design researcher, and really beginning to understand how to sort of open myself up and take a lot of the preconceived ideas and just sort of put them aside and understand the market and understand the needs and the opportunities. And we teach a lot about human-centered design, and this is really a place where there has to be more of it, because there's just not a sort of general population consciousness around what are those needs. There's a desire to help, but quite often it's sort of implied that they know what these folks need, or what I need. I mean, I have this conversation all of the time with senior living folks. It's like I say to them, I'm your target audience here, and I'm telling you I'll never live in your facilities. And, so what do you got for me, And do you really understand what people are looking for, in different generations, in different demographics, in different locations? What are the needs there? And really go deep and understand that first, and then start to build your business around it, because you have a better chance of succeeding at that point.
So what, if anything, out there gives you a positive look on this? That is it just the opportunity still to be grabbed? Not to give you binary choices here, but is it that the opportunity is still to be grabbed? Is it that you're seeing slowly examples of folks that do understand this principle, or have simply lucked out and come upon doing it?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of happy mistakes. We worked on a number of different projects with Toyota, and they've developed vehicles for what they thought was a youth market, that, the average age of the purchaser of some of their vehicles is 55 when they thought they were targeting 25. And hey, yes, you sold a lot of cars, but did you really understand what you were doing there? So I think there's definitely a lot of those cases. I mean, I am seeing a lot more activity in this space, which gives me hope. My sort of analogy the other day to someone was, it is like popcorn going off in the microwave compared to what it was like 8 years ago. When for me to sit down with one of our clients that we have a long-term relationship with and have a conversation around aging was just, that's great, but, and I kind of take it back to my years in architecture when I would try and sell green buildings to people, and this is like 20 years ago, and they'd look at me and go, it's a nice to have, And I think, the shift is happening. Definitely it's happening. I think there's a lot of folks waking up to the opportunity who weren't necessarily in the space, and that's very exciting. It's not the usual players. I'm trying to think of a really good example, but it's not coming to me.
All right. Well, when and if, just chime
Yep.
in. On your point about you will never live in those places. I think when you're talking about a population that's over 100 million people, to Lisa's point, it is heterogeneous. It's more people than most countries. It's not one size fits all. And so within that, there are groups of people that absolutely do want to live in places where it's behind a gated community. They don't hear the noise of children. My mother, who's 85, lives on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. For years, the family, friends, Harriet, moved to Florida. You got friends, you got relatives. And her response is, if I can't hear a child laugh, shoot me now.
Yep.
And, but to your point about that, you won't live in those places. I was speaking at a conference of managers of long-term care facilities, assisted living facilities. And there was about 450 people in the audience. I said, show of hands, who is involved in the management of such facilities? And practically everybody's hand went up. I said, okay, keep your hands up. Who is looking forward to living in the facility that you manage? There were 12 hands that stayed up. And I said, well, that's a problem if the very people who manage these things don't even want to live in them. But I do think that between affordability and everything else, it's a real
quite often
challenge.
they think innovation is digital bingo on Friday night rather than just
Yeah,
bingo.
exactly.
Right, and what is
Play
interesting
shuffleboard
though,
on your iPad.
But I think the one thing that really scares me about all of that is the fact that we now have scientific data that says that staying active, staying engaged, staying employed, or just volunteering or do something, adds years to your life. And so my question to them is, what are you doing to, help your residents have better quality of life and live longer? Because the model right now doesn't really cover that.
right, and the average age of people in those facilities is actually inching up in the mid and high 80s. So Paul, just flipping a little bit here, economics and business is premised on the allocation of resources in a paradigm of scarcity. And our friend Mark Friedman, talks about the fact that for one of the first times, we really have a situation where we have abundance. And that abundance is an abundance of experienced human capital. And that both from a larger macroeconomic standpoint, but also from a specific business standpoint, that employers don't get it, and society doesn't get it. AARP just yesterday announced a study that we did with Aon Hewitt about the benefits to a work environment, to companies, about having experienced workers. How do you frame this? How do you see this?
So I think what this is an expression of, Jody, is the breadth of this opportunity. What is the longevity economy? Yes, it's innovative products and services, it's venture capital, it's advanced design, it's travel, it's food, it's fashion, it's lots of other things, but it goes actually way beyond that. It's massive social and cultural change, and really a change in life in the way we've understood it for generations. So I want to focus on two areas just to cover something a little bit different. Area 1, education. Area 2, business. So area one education. Harvard University opened its doors in 1636. The lifespan that humankind experienced at that point was the lifespan it experienced in most of human history, which was in the range of 30 to 40 years. About 150 years ago, we started this very rapid progression in longevity, which we know has now led to a doubling of lifespan and the potential for dramatically increasing lifespan based on advances in science and sanitation and safety. And yet, universities, I had this conversation with a group of university presidents not too long ago, universities still focus their marketing efforts, their energies. Joe, you may tell me things are different at MIT on a cohort principally between 18 and 27, 28. So my question to university presidents was, so 100 years ago, someone entered your university, very talented. You sought to retain them. They actually stayed on to get a PhD. They may have had in their late 20s begun a battle for tenure, had 10 years of productive scholarship, and died. Why shouldn't it be the case? Why shouldn't it be the case that somebody now at 50, who's bright and energetic and wants to change their life, should be able to enter a program at a university, seek a PhD, compete for tenure in their 50s, and have 20 to 30 years of productive scholarship? Why doesn't that make sense? So, my point to you.
They can afford it without a loan.
And by the way, for an industry, let's call it an industry, for an industry with a fundamentally challenged financial model, this may not be true for the top 10 or 15 institutions in the United States, probably not for Joe's, but for most institutions in the United States, not Harvard, Stanford, Yale, et cetera, MIT, Caltech, but for most universities, really difficult times balancing cost and the incredible challenges of most kids in the United States.
It's hard to imagine given what they're charging me.
To be able to pay. So is this a potential solution to to that challenge. A larger academic cohort, new revenue stream. But let me tell you, changing institutions like universities requires disruption, requires a new view. So now let me move very quickly to business. So I think that there are underlying biases. Ageism exists. Let's acknowledge it. And by the way, there are plenty of statistics to show that older workers in the wake of the Great Recession have had a more difficult time seeking reemployment, reengagement, et cetera. Part of that, I think, is just inevitably based on a series of understandings, expectations about older workers. So let me challenge any scientist in the room to think about this. When we measure aging capacity, the aging brain, the talents of older people, we tend to measure them against what? We tend to measure them against the capacity of younger people. That's kind of the standard. That's the baseline that we use to think about things like memory loss and physical capacity and level of energy and the like. What if we used the measure of older people as a baseline to test younger populations? What would the results be? Now, I'm not advocating that, by the way. I think supporting younger workforces is incredibly important too. But let me tell you some of the things we know about older workforces. Older employees are more balanced. They are better cross-sectoral problem solvers. They demonstrate more loyalty and more longevity in their jobs. By the way, a basic misunderstanding of business. People kind of think, gee, I'll hire a 30-year-old because the 30-year-old may be with me for 20 or 30 years. If I hire a 60-year-old, that won't be the case. Truth of the matter is the cultures change generation to generation. That 60-year-old is more likely to stick around. Another thing that research finds is that mixed-age teams consistently outperform same-age teams. So for anyone in the audience who is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, if you have a really interesting skunkworks project that you want to engage your smartest, best, most creative team on, don't put two 30-year-olds from Lisa with PhDs in computer science from Stanford in the back of the room. Put one who's 30 and one who's 65, and you'll get better results. So I could go through a whole list of expectations about older workers that really are belied by the research, the facts, et cetera, an increasing appreciation of the value of the aging brain and aging talent. And I think what we're learning is, in the same way we've begun to learn, we know that, for example, corporate boards that have more women tend to outperform corporate boards that don't. We know that diverse employee bases actually now measurably tend to outperform homogeneous employee bases. We're finding the same thing about age. So guess what? Embrace your younger workers, embrace your older workers, and you'll have a better, more competitive business.
No, it's funny. To your point, a couple of your points. I teach a class in the business school at Berkeley about venture capital, and part of the class I have entrepreneurs come in every week and CEOs of companies who are actively raising money and pitch their deals. And last week I had two. A guy who couldn't be more than 27, 28 years old, looks like Ryan Gosling. Everybody in the room wants to date him, guys and the girls, I think. And then I had a guy who looked more like you.
That bad, huh?
Ryan Gosling, a few years later.
Just to be clear, you're pointing to him.
He clearly had a beard.
Not that he wasn't incredibly attractive.
Joe and I got to buy
But
on
he
this
wasn't
one.
Ryan Gosling at 27. So at the end of the class, when the CEOs were gone, one of the exercises is we debrief, and I asked the class, and this was going to be surreptitiously a lecture about this very topic, which they did not know was coming. And they said, who would you rather invest in? Because that's the final in the class. Pick a company you'd want to invest in. Why? Right? So now we had to talk about management and how important management was. Which is the company, based on those two, that we thought, hey, would you rather invest in? Which is the CEO you'd rather invest in specifically? And 100% of the hands went up for Ryan Gosling. Now, if you had sat in that room and listened to these presentations, the younger guy, smart guy and all, but he, frankly, does not know his market very well. His product's ill-defined. His company is young and has almost no revenue. The other guy has 30 years.
How old was he?
He was probably 60. Mm-hmm. He had 30 years experience, running companies. His company had 17 million in revenue, had been very successful, worldwide company, still growing, but like on the facts, if you didn't see the person, you'd be an idiot not to pick that other company. Apparently they're a bunch of idiots, So I pointed that out, and I said, wow, that is shocking. That is a really important thing to notice.
Lisa, you need older students in your class.
Yeah, right? Well, and then they're all second-year MBA students. Most of them are probably 27, 28 years old, 29 years old. And stuff. But I think it really speaks also to your education point, which is we're not teaching people about the importance of this, right? About the importance of diverse age, diverse age culture. And in business school, if they're looking for big opportunities, right, they're also idiots if they don't recognize this one in some way. Yeah. And so I found it really disturbing, and it made me think about, like, what are we teaching them in the business curriculum around this diversity issue of aging? Nothing, apparently.
So we'll go on, chime in.
No, I was just saying, I'd like to tie to what Paul was saying, the one issue around education and two around business and diversity. One of the biggest challenges we have in the longevity economy is not necessarily a lack of technology or a lack of need, but the number one thing we're missing, lack of imagination. When I was showing you the length of the lifespan, we have not begun to envision what people would need. So let's give you an example. Paul dissected nicely the education opportunity, maybe going back and getting your PhD at 50 or 60, whatever it might be, and becoming faculty, and the need for older workers. But one of the things we haven't even thought about is, what's the future of education if you're going to live close to 100 years old? Do you genuinely believe that sitting in my class or your class for ages 0 to 21 or 0 to 25 is going to last you a lifetime? How do you make the business case to stay in the workplace for not 30 years, 40 years, but 50 or 60 years, changing not one or two jobs, but 2 or 3 or 4 careers? So, there's a business opportunity in terms of what's the future of education in a life of 100 years. And yet we're still trying to force 100 years in the institutions that our parents and grandparents had, and trying to ask the question, how do we make it better? No, throw it out and start over, because we've never had this opportunity before. It takes design thinking, if you will, to think creatively about how to reinvent life, not reinvent aging.
Yeah, Paul. And I just want to say, just quickly, and for the parents in the room, for those of us who were the parents of millennials, it's really something to think about in terms of what we emphasize in education, right? So we become, I'm a huge fan of STEM education. I think it's incredibly important, but this notion of kind of fact-based education versus flexibility, a broad liberal view of education, creativity, the love of learning and the ability to learn. The ability to learn at different times in one's life is so unbelievably important, because those facts you learn today are very unlikely to be the facts that exist or embraced 40, 50, 60 years
10 years ago,
from
we
now.
didn't think the brain could be better than it is.
Right.
I mean, oh, no, it's fixed. It's the only organ that dies. Well, not so much.
Yeah.
Gretchen.
No, I was just going to say, back to my earlier comment about, this isn't a conversation about age. This is a conversation about generations and about being able to dialogue and understand. I mean, I talk with my own kids who are 26 and 32, and I say to them, exactly what you're saying. If you think you're done with your education, think twice. You're going to go back to school. You're going to have continuing education for the rest of your life. So, accept that fact. And I think engaging younger people and in talking about a lot of these things at a lot earlier age, is definitely to their benefit. I'm sort of the mind that, I'm going to be able to manage this, but I'm really concerned about how my kids are going to manage it, and, where they're going to have the resources or the support to be able to do the things that they want to do across their lifespan, and how am I going to be able to help them?
So, one of the things that I've been struck by, and I'm hearing it confirmed, by all of you, is this is not intuitive for the private sector. It's not top of mind for society overall, regardless of age. To Lisa's point about Silicon Valley, we sponsor, we being ARP, the National Venture Capital Association annual meeting. And the first year that we did it, we were the brunt of jokes. Everybody, including people eligible for membership in AARP, felt a need to tell an old joke or a joke about AARP specifically. And so the subtle message that we brought was, speaking of idiots, you'd have to be an idiot to turn your back on the only humongous growth market that exists. And that's been, a constant drumbeat of ours. And little by little, segments have then come back to us and said, okay, we get it. Shut up, Holtzman. We get it. Big numbers. Now where should we focus? So there is a drumbeat, there is popcorn popping that does reflect still a small number, but a growing number of companies, of decision makers in the business community, whether investors or companies like MassMutual, where we heard earlier today, that are seeing this as either a conundrum and a challenge because they're looking at these numbers going forward and all of a sudden it's scaring them a bit, and or they're starting to see it also as opportunity. And it's those that are finally seeing opportunity. What differentiates them? What is it, and what's the hook to get more of them interested? I've always just assumed, and maybe it's wrong, that it's just the numbers. It's that $7.1 trillion number. It's the $5+ trillion in consumer spending.
In many cases, I would argue that Fortune 500 companies that we've worked with around the world, the number almost scares them off. Because executives get paid to execute. If they can't get their arm around it, they say, nice idea, good, good opportunity, put it over here. Because unless they can really find a way to get into that market. So I would say that a lot of companies fall into one of the couple categories. One is, can I sell more of what I already make to this group by changing the brochure a bit, or making it easier to hold?
Are you suggesting they have a 2x2?
Pretty close. But I mean, basically, as an academic, I get paid to watch. These guys and gals get paid to do. And generally speaking, a big opportunity is too much to chew on. So they look for little ways, do I make this more usable? Can I make it more user-friendly? Is aging the same as disability? So maybe I can take care of that in one market. Do I change the brochure? It's really the imaginative leader that says, no, this is a new market with new product and service demands, not more of the same. That's hard to find.
And Jody, we're all products ultimately of our of context and our own experience. And the people who are running companies these days grew up during an era where there was a youth focus.
Yep.
Aging was less an issue, and they're just becoming acculturated to the notion that this is. It may be scary, but it's big, and they have to deal with it. I think there is another factor too that we have to talk about. Kind of back to the employment piece, and I think very much apropos Lisa's comment, and that is our own ageism. And even those of us, and Joe made the joke at the beginning of the session, and it was the right joke, and we all have to have a sense of humor about our changing physical characteristics and all the rest. But the truth of the matter is that older people put in exactly the same position that Lisa's students were. This is maybe the sad irony. Probably would have done exactly the same thing.
Because he looked like their grandson. He was so adorable.
No, it's because I think of fear. Interestingly, by the way, in our society, in the United States, more and more, and I think in other places across the world, we've actually begun fairly robust conversations about death. We're now talking about personal choice. We're talking about burial. We're talking about estate planning. We're talking about how we want to be treated in the event that we're infirm, et cetera. We really haven't talked very much about this longevity dividend around the dinner table yet, and I think we better start that conversation.
But I think, to answer your question, Jody, I think the answer is, as with all things, follow the money. Because when I first started in venture, which was 16, 17 years ago, it was decidedly unhip to invest in things that looked like they were for the senior market, right? And I mean, you guys at AARP have done a lot on the PR front to change that, I think, genuinely. And others have spent time on that as well. And I think it became and has become, over the last several years, more cool. And I think the more cool is related to how much more money is available to be spent here, both through the public articulation of money being spent in the healthcare system and the money being spent on anti-aging types of things to make people's longer lives better, while they're still healthy. I think about companies, I was thinking, about successful examples, and one, I think about companies like Butterfly, which if you don't know is a consumer products company that is basically a product like a little panty liner kind of a thing, but for men and women, to guard against mild bowel leakage, which is super sexy, I know, but hey, a lot of people stay inside.
We'll be cutting this part of the tape
don't
out.
go to work because of these kinds of personal problems, and this gives people sort of a new lease on life to go outside and do their work and shop and do things again. And this is a product from a company whose entrepreneur is a woman in her early 50s, which is an unusual type of entrepreneur to see. I think we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and beyond, and especially beyond, because Silicon Valley is horrifically age sensitive. Thinking about this opportunity because they see the money opportunity from the controlling 80% of GDP, right? And I think as that becomes more and more evident as some of these companies, grow and grow, and as these younger people experience their families aging, you'll see more of it. I mean, I think about a friend of mine who was just upset because his dad was turned 65, and a younger friend obviously, turned 65 and is being forced to retire by a public accounting firm. And his dad is very youthful and should not be forced to retire. And that's a policy that comes from another time, right? Yeah. And, he was thinking about what do you do, for people to re-educate them for their next career. And this guy, very educated guy. So I just, it's a really remarkable time. And I think the discourse about this is just beginning on the investment side in a real way.
Mm-hmm. No, I was just going to build on that. I think follow the money is always good advice. I think quite often for our clients, one of the ways that we help to frame it, to Joe's point of it's such a big, sort of where do I start, is kind of talking about it in the context of lifestyle and life stage. It's a hard thing to talk about age and demographics and age and all of those numbers. I wish we all had a great, sort of educational background in it. It's one thing I never learned in school. And yet, when you start to talk to people about things that are much more personal or that they can relate to themselves, and helping them to sort of frame it around something that is more human-centered, if you will, or just life, really begins to help them to say, okay, if you are looking to go after this part of the market and this lifestyle and life stage, and there's plenty of examples there where, whether it's around having a baby or getting married or whatever it is, there's gigantic industries built around all of these things. And so a lot of times what I'll say to them is, it was successful here, what can you learn from it? And by the way, the life stage, that people are in when they have an empty nest or when they have a second career that they want to pursue or any of these kinds of things, how do you position yourself relative to them? Because the numbers are great, but I think you need that balance of really looking at it from the life perspective and sort of framing it in that way that helps people get a little closer to sort of
get their arms around it.
Get their arms around it and actually want to do it.
So Joe, in your interactions with large corporations, is there any spark that jumps out at you where somebody's asking the right question as opposed to the wrong ones? Is that somebody is saying, we do see this opportunity and it is bite size, that we can grab it and it will make a difference either in the quality of somebody's life or just gaining attention to the opportunity in the market.
Where we have perhaps the longest track record, mixed metaphor intended, is with the auto industry. And I think that one or two companies in particular are now starting to ask the question, and not just about how can we make things more visible or easier to use or the dials bigger for arthritic hands, but asking, gee, what are the mobility patterns going to be of a new group of energetic older adults? And what kind of vehicles might be necessary to meet those needs? And I think that you've had leaders, Toyota comes to mind in particular, that is asking about the mobility questions and then backing up and then saying, okay, what's the product? Or indeed, what might be the service to meet those new needs? So that kind of creativity is, I think, what's going to invent the future of old age, if you will, more than anything else.
Now, speaking, and to Lisa's point earlier about her Ryan Gosling clone, who did not know his market. I mean, the auto industry knows its market. I mean, the buyers of new cars, the average age is in the mid-50s.
Yeah, especially if it's a luxury car or higher, it gets much older. But the auto industry also can teach the rest of the world about how to develop products for older adults. Oldsmobile, not your father's Oldsmobile. Well, it was, and now it's gone. But the other thing in the auto industry, it's an old adage, and I'm going to repeat it here, is that you cannot make an old man's car, because if you do, a young man and a young woman will not buy it. But here's the corollary: neither will an old man or an older woman. And so having a world that we're talking about the longevity economy, please do not leave this room and believe that we want everything to have very large handles and everything to be in clinical blue and gray, the imagery that we often associate with an aging society. No, the challenge is, how do we excite and delight the consumer in their latter third or latter 50% of their life? And that's where it takes imagination. And the one thing it's missing, it's not a business issue, and frankly, government needs to do this as well. It's not a policy issue. It's a storyline issue. How do we frame or reframe the idea of whether it's not Ryan Gosling, it's based upon the numbers and capability? How do we reframe that aging is about life, not about getting closer to death?
So we got to stop calling it midlife crisis and start calling it new consumer engagement.
Yeah.
or evolution to a higher plane. Joe, I'm curious. Why is it? Something I just will never understand. People have a life of learning, a life of experience, presumably increasing sophistication, right, during the course of their lives. Why is it that people trivialize older people by assuming somehow that as they get older, presumably more sophisticated, more refined in their taste, that they're less interested in good design?
Well, they're not trivialized, they infantilize.
Yeah.
Infantilize.
Yeah.
So just for example, we had a startup on our stage at our first event, and these were brilliant MIT guys in their 20s, and they were creating Q-Medic. And they were creating a personal emergency response system, a PERS device, right? Everybody is familiar with PERS devices because we're all sick of the commercial, I've fallen and I can't get up. That's a PERS device. And what's the fascinating thing is about those devices, which, here's the paradox. On the one hand, it's a horrible image of older people, but it clearly sells because that commercial has not changed in 30 years. That said, half of those pendants that are bought, and again, bought for the older person, not with the older person, end up in a drawer. Why? To Joe's point,
they look like Flavor Flav. They're this big, right?
Right. But it's like even the oldest and the frailest don't want to walk around with something like a neon sign saying I'm old and frail. To your point about a car for old people. So these guys got on stage, and if you remember what the first generation of sports watches were like, there were these huge plastic, gray, ugly things. And we pass the mic at our events. We do something that nobody else can do because we have the consumer, and we pass the mic. And this attractive African-American woman in her 70s is my guest, decked out to the nines, stands up and says to this young man, if you want me to wear that, you better glam it up. And this was like a lightning bolt. Yeah. They did not even consider that an older person might want to look, nice, and that this might be a piece of jewelry. Right. But here was even the more silver lining. Then they realized, well, wow, if this is actually a fashion accessory, we could sell more than one to a given individual. Because now we're talking about matching it with different outfits. And what did they do? They hired a designer from Cartier. So, but that was accidental falling into it. Nintendo redesigned the Wii to grow their market younger originally. And they really, looked at the tactile capabilities of a young child, particularly a boy. And they ended up with something that actually mimicked the tactile and hand capabilities of an older person. All of a sudden, Nintendo Wiis are popping up in assisted living places because finally there was a way to get people off the couch and physically active.
It's so successful, by the way. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. There's something called the Wii Wrist and Wii Elbow. They are playing in these leagues so competitively that they're actually hurting ligaments in a way.
Right. Okay, so maybe not that effective.
But to your point, the advertisement keeps going not because it's successful, because the adoption rate of systems that you think you would need rationally in the United States is less than 2 to 3%, and it's cheaper than cable TV. Even in the UK, where it's paid for, it's only 12% penetration rate. Because people don't buy what they need; they buy what they want, especially if it says "old man walking." And as a result, that product is going nowhere because the industry has got a freeze frame that older means older, frail, and unable.
But I think there are industries, pretty significant industries that are beginning to make serious progress. I mean, we know we've got a lot of representatives of the financial services industry here. The financial services industry, for very obvious reasons of enlightened self-interest, are really focused on messaging, creativity, new products and services. They're all struggling. They're kind of trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. But whether it's BlackRock, look, they're not only, by the way, creating products and services, but they're also these companies are oftentimes the most imaginative companies on older worker policies because they want to be seen as age friendly. Barclays now has a mid-career internship program. Goldman has done one recently. Our friend Ken Dykewald consults with B of A and Merrill and a number of others. Fidelity's got an interesting program. So I think what everyone realizes is that this is frankly a business gold mine, and that there is going to be this massive struggle over who kind of owns the right brand, the right messaging, the right vocabulary. I don't think anyone feels that they have it right yet.
No, I was just going to say, I think financial services is stepping up, but I think that they are still far behind in terms of understanding the vocabulary and how to talk to people. I mean, no financial service company comes to me and says, I know you've ditched retirement, so I'm going to help you. Right. It's just not there.
Right. Well, there still is this perspective about this word retirement. And frankly, I don't think there's a definition for it anymore. Right?
I think it's losing your job when you're old now. I mean, it's not, if you retire, I mean, we talked about this earlier today, if you retire when you're 65, you're going to outlive your money if you're remotely healthy, so you have to keep working. You probably haven't saved enough. It's really, I don't think companies actually have done a very good job, financial companies, thinking about new products for retirement or later life financial support or Alzheimer's, there's a whole world of new problems and challenges financially. God help you if you live long enough, you might really have a problem with financially, and we really haven't innovated profoundly in that area.
How do you incentivize people to save money to do something we don't even know we're going to be doing? I mean, how many cruise ships rides can you go on? Right. What I'm saying is that after you walk a few daughters down the aisle, go on a cruise ship, at about 67, a lot of companies will say, what are you going to do on day 1 of retirement? That's the wrong question. What are you going to do on day 2 of retirement? Because 20 or 30 years of waiting is not something that gives me a great excitement to save money for at 45.
So let me put each of you on the spot, because we're getting down to the end of our time. So if there was one market, one product category, one piece of advice, now let me take that back. One market, one product category that you think holds out the greatest opportunity should they follow your design advice. What is it that jumps out at you based on the work you've done and the experience you've had?
Well, right now I would say it's supporting people and their caregivers around Alzheimer's and dementia. I mean, unfortunately, this is the negative side of aging. If you're 80, your chances of having Alzheimer's are about 20%. And something like 1/3 of all people will die with some form of dementia. And there really is no adequate programming, living, caregiver support, you name it, life insurance, disability, any kind of program out there that serves that massive need. And while it's not positive, it's negative, I think there's great opportunity. You're seeing a lot of innovation, or at least attempted innovation on early diagnosis, drugs, et cetera, interventions, but there's a long way to go. I think it's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, Paul?
Well, I mean, I think I always talk about the kind of the 2-foot putt in health, which is prevention and wellness. It's the one thing we know that works. We way underinvest in it federally. So I think that this is the opportunity. I think the opportunity is digital health. I think the opportunity to improve people's understanding of their personal health conditions and to create incentives, disincentives, behavioral modification, et cetera, through this little device has the potential to change the world.
Okay. And when Lisa sees another one of those and says, I see 10 of you a day, what makes you different? Then we'll see the ones that can really differentiate. Gretchen?
I'd say sort of the life planning, financial planning is a part of that, but just the life planning and the sort of dialogue and conversation among generations to really think about, looking to the future and understanding and planning for it.
Joe?
I see aging as fundamentally a woman's issue. 40+% of women over 65 live by themselves. Innovation needs to be done in home services that maybe leverage the sharing economy to make it possible for me to live longer, better, where I choose to live, my home.
So I can't see the back. Session over, it says.
Well done, Jody.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.